It all started with a missing bottle of Worcestershire sauce. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen our breakfast table bear the brunt of worse offences. Fritz once overcooked the eggs Benedict, and once I even caught Nero Wolfe grimacing over underwhipped cream. But that morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting the usual symphony of clinks, sizzles, and Fritz's understated finesse, only to find him frowning at a tray like it had insulted his mother. "No sauce," he muttered, his Austrian dignity ruffled. "It is not in the pantry, nor the cellar shelves." I glanced at the breakfast tray, crisp poached eggs, bacon, toast cut with surgical precision, and then at Fritz, who looked like he'd been robbed at gunpoint. "Wolf's gonna love this," I said, grabbing the tray and heading for the dining room. "Want me to draw up your will before I go in?" Fritz didn't reply. He just sighed and crossed himself. I walked into the office with the tray held like a peace offering and set it down on Wolfe's mahogany desk with a silent flourish. He didn't look up right away, too engrossed in whatever 6th century Byzantine botanical manuscript he was rereading for the 5th time. "I'm going to regret this," I said, but Fritz couldn't find the Worcestershire sauce. That got his attention. Wolfe raised his eyes slowly, like a submarine periscope surfacing to assess the enemy. His lips puckered as if tasting the eggs from 10 feet away. "Unacceptable," he murmured. "Unacceptable." "Try not to faint," I said. "You can still taste the bacon." Wolfe made a noise that could only be described as aristocratic disdain. "Worcestershire sauce is a vital stimulant. The absence is barbarous." And that's when the doorbell rang. It was just past 9, which in the Wolfe household is practically sacrilege. We don't do mornings unless murder's involved, or a missing condiment, apparently. I left Wolfe grumbling like a Roman senator and went to the front door. She was standing there in a dove-grey coat that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, her lipstick perfectly unsmeared despite the September breeze, and her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She was too composed to be frantic, too nervous to be lying, and she held a manila envelope in one gloved hand. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "will want to see this." "Lady," I replied, "Mr. Wolfe wants to finish his eggs first." She handed me the envelope like it might explode. "Then tell him the Penthouse betrayal is no longer a rumor. It's a fact." She turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. The wind caught her hair as she moved, a platinum sweep in a world painted sepia, and then she disappeared down the steps like a scene change in a noir flick. Back in the office, Wolfe had resumed his grim study of the sauceless breakfast. I dropped the envelope on the table beside his orange juice and said, "Something tells me you'll want to delay your post-egg indignation." He lifted one brow and opened the envelope with his penknife, gold-handled naturally. Inside was a single black-and-white photo and a typewritten sheet of paper. The photo showed a man slumped in a leather chair on what looked like a penthouse balcony. Skyline in the background, Manhattan's sharper edges blurred by dusk. His head lolled to the side, and a single shoe had fallen off. The rest was shadow and implication. Wolfe peered at the photo for a full minute before reading the note aloud. "The man in the picture is Martin S. Lyle, billionaire real estate heir, found dead yesterday evening in his penthouse suite. Police say suicide. I say betrayal. This man didn't jump. He was pushed. You're the only one who can prove it. You'll be paid handsomely. But you must act discreetly. You'll understand why soon. A friend to the betrayed." He looked up at me. "Archie, tea, and bring the saucer from the corner cabinet. Not the Royal Doulton, the Limoges." "Yes, sir," I said. "And should I also pack the revolver? Or are we solving this one with teacups?" Wolfe scowled. "A penthouse death masquerading as suicide? Already I smell deceit, and I do not like deceit." He paused, examining the note again. "And betrayal. Betrayal is a word chosen for effect. Deliberate. Suicide's been ruled, I asked. By the police, apparently. But not by this mysterious correspondent. He held up the photo again. We need to learn more about Martinez Lyle. I want his obituary, professional ties, and any whispers in the press. On it. And Archie? I was halfway out the door. Yes? Begin with his family. Any family fortune implies old grudges. Old grudges are fertile ground. I nodded. Sure. But what about the source? Wolfe's face darkened. Find it, before lunch. I closed the door behind me and headed for my typewriter with the envelope tucked under my arm. I already had a list of calls to make. Press contacts, a quick jog over to the Gazette's archives, and maybe a discreet ring to Lon Cohen to check police whispers. But something about the woman at the door stuck with me. Her timing, her composure, the way she didn't even flinch at Wolfe's inflexible schedule. She knew him, or she'd studied him, and that was the first itch of suspicion under my collar. I sat down at my desk and picked up the phone, dialing the Gazette. As it rang, I pulled the photo back out and flipped it over. A scribbled note was scrawled faintly in pencil. The chair was already turned when he fell. I froze. Now that was a breadcrumb. Wolfe had returned to his chair and was glaring at the tepid remains of his breakfast like it had personally offended the Republic of Orchids. I didn't blame him. The poached eggs were going the way of the dodo, and the toast had lost its crunch half a war ago. But his eyes weren't really on the food. They were on the envelope and the photograph, and more importantly, on that cryptic scrawl on the back. The chair was already turned when he fell. That little line had tilted the floor a degree. I dialed Lon Cohen first. The man may work for the Gazette, but if gossip were a religion, Lon would have a corner office in the Vatican. Archie, he answered, you're early. Wolfe forget to water the orchids and go berserk? Not yet, I said, but something might be cooking on a Penthouse grill. Lyle? That's the one. What do you know? A pause. Then a low whistle. Official word is suicide, Lon said. Martin S. Lyle, 38, heir to the Lyle Realty fortune. Slashed wrists, found by his housekeeper last night, Esther something, long-time employee. Cops arrived at 7:43 p.m., pronounced it open and shut. Note found on the table. No signs of forced entry. None mentioned in the early briefings. But there's chatter. Such as, Lyle's sister doesn't believe it. Not for a second. Swears he'd never take his own life. Name? Veronica Lyle. Widowed. She's been quiet with the press, but I know she's making phone calls. Rumor is she's lining up some private muscle. Sounds like she already knocked on our door. Another pause. She went to Wolfe, dropped a photo and left a riddle, then vanished. She's smart, Lon said, or desperate, maybe both. I thanked him, scribbled some notes, and made a mental note to look into the housekeeper, the sister, and the physical setup of that penthouse. When I stepped back into the office, Wolfe was holding the photograph as if it were a petri dish crawling with plague. This, he said, is theatrical. A man seated in a leather armchair, facing outward toward the skyline, his posture slumped but composed, and a penciled note. The chair was already turned when he fell. Nonsense. Meaning. Wolfe set the photo down gently, precisely like he was shelving a library book. It's a stage, he said. Someone arranged that scene with care. That implies intent and artistry. I flopped into the red chair across from his desk and crossed one leg over the other. Then we're treating it as murder? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he laced his fingers over his considerable middle and stared at the globe beside his desk like he was planning a military invasion. There's no client yet, he said. No fee, no formal engagement. Merely a photograph and a puzzle. Then should I? Yes, he snapped. Proceed. That was Wolfe's way of admitting he was interested without actually lowering himself to emotional enthusiasm. By noon, I'd dug up a decent sketch of the players. Martin S. Lyle was the last direct heir to a real estate empire built on 30-story buildings, lobbying loopholes and artful tax dodge. He inherited the business when his father, Irving Lyle, died of a stroke 2 years prior. Since then, Lyle Properties had been in the papers more for internal reshuffling than real estate deals. The sister, Veronica, was no lightweight either. She'd married and buried a Wall Street trader in less than 3 years, walked away with a chunk of cash, and was reportedly trying to buy her way onto the board of directors at the Met. No kids, no scandals, just ambition that could slice marble. I brought Wolfe the files along with a fresh bottle of Worcestershire sauce Fritz had triumphantly unearthed behind a row of capers. Wolfe didn't comment on the sauce, which meant he'd forgiven the morning's sin. He flipped through the dossiers with his fingertips like he was blindfolded and trying to read them in Braille. "This," he muttered, "is too orderly. Look at his photo in the press. Perfectly parted hair, no creases in the collar. A man like that doesn't bleed out in a chair and leave no mess." "Maybe he used a hotel towel," I offered. Wolfe gave me a glance that could prune a bonsai tree. "I want to see the Penthouse," he said. "You will go?" "Thought so." "And Archie, be attentive to the chairs. People leave imprints of personality in chairs, more than they realize." That was pure Wolfe. A man who could tell if you were cheating on your taxes based on how you sat in a recliner. By 3 p.m., I was in the elevator of the Orion Tower, watching the red digital numbers climb like a countdown to judgment. Floor 31, 32, 33. The penthouse button required a key, which the building supervisor had given me after a few nudges and a flash of Wolfe's name. It still carried weight in Manhattan, even if it usually terrified doormen. The doors opened to a small marble landing and a pair of glossy black doors that looked like they could stop a tank. I knocked. No answer. Inside, the penthouse was glass, gold, and silence. The furniture was modern, sharp, impersonal. But in the main lounge, just off the east-facing terrace, I saw the chair, a wide leather behemoth, rich, brown, aged like whiskey, facing outward, skyline framed behind it. I stepped closer. The indent in the cushion was deep. Still there. No bloodstains were visible from where I stood, but I didn't need a red splash to see the scene. I could picture Lyle, or someone like him, arranged there like a museum piece. And the note said, "The chair was already turned when he fell. That meant Lyle didn't position it. Someone else had." I crouched and ran a finger along the base, then paused. There, wedged between the leg and the rug, was something metallic. I fished it out with a pen, a thin cufflink. Gold. Monogrammed with the initials DR. That wasn't Martin S. Lyle's monogram. It wasn't Veronica's either. I slipped it into a handkerchief, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my coat pocket just as the front door groaned open behind me. "Excuse me," came a voice. Female, clipped, and not happy. "Who are you and what are you doing in my brother's home?" I turned. There stood Veronica Lyle, poised, cold, but her eyes scanned the room like a hawk. I gave her the winning smile and showed my card. "Archie Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe's assistant." Her mouth tightened. "He hasn't taken the case yet." I nodded. "Maybe not. But your brother's chair just told me a story I don't think the NYPD heard." She narrowed her gaze. "And you're going to tell Wolfe everything," she said. I smiled again. "Ma'am, that's exactly what I do." Veronica Lyle didn't waste time with niceties, and I didn't expect her to. She crossed the living room like she owned the skyline and planted herself a safe 6 feet away from me, close enough to assess, far enough to strike if needed. I could almost hear her mind racing as her gaze flicked between me, the chair, and the faint crease in the rug where something small had been dislodged. "I assume you've already found something," she said. I assume you already know I'm not the NYPD, I replied. Her lips twitched in a smile that didn't get anywhere near her eyes. That's why I came to Wolfe. Police see categories. You and he see contradictions. I could have quipped, but instead I pulled out my notebook and kept the tone neutral. Then help me understand what contradiction we're dealing with here. Who is DR? Her eyes flinched, not enough to be called a blink, but enough for me to scribble a mental asterisk beside the question. What are you talking about? I tapped my jacket pocket. Cufflink. Gold. DR monogram. Found under the chair your brother bled into. Martin didn't know anyone with those initials. Maybe not. But someone knew Martin. She hesitated. For a moment I thought she might spin some carefully ironed denial, but instead she moved toward the wet bar and poured herself an inch of gin. No ice, no lemon, just nerve tonic, straight. There was a man, she said. Last spring, Daniel Rowan, lawyer, young, ambitious, attached to an investment firm we'd been circling for a merger. Martin took a shine to him. Briefly. I didn't like him. Smiled too much. Rowan and Martin, I muttered, like a comedy duo. She didn't laugh. Martin was known to trust too easily, especially men with expensive shoes and loud flattery. The last I heard, Rowan had left the firm and moved out of state. But he left his jewelry behind. Veronica's fingers tightened on the glass. Then he was here recently, which is very interesting considering the police said Martin hadn't had a visitor in over 24 hours. Mind if I borrow the name? Do whatever you must, she said. But if Daniel Rowan had anything to do with this, I want to be present when Wolfe unravels him. I promised nothing. Wolfe wasn't in the habit of entertaining front-row guests during disembowelments, but I took the name and the context and made my exit before she could offer more gin or family tragedy. Outside, the sky had turned gunmetal gray, and the cab ride back to the brownstone was just long enough for my brain to connect a few threads. When I got home, Fritz handed me a sandwich. Wolfe grunted that he would not be disturbed during the 4-hour orchid check, and I spent the downtime calling every roan in New York until I hit gold, or at least polished brass. A receptionist at Hemsley and Goldridge confirmed a forwarding number for a Daniel Rowan, formerly of their litigation department, now practicing independently out of Hartford, Connecticut. I didn't call right away. First, I gave Wolfe the update. Cufflink, Rowan, the chair position, and watched his eyebrows crawl upward like cautious caterpillars. I knew it, he said, almost smug. Chairs do not lie. People do, he sniffed. Of course. That is why we rely on objects. Objects, Mr. Goodwin, are incapable of dissimulation. A cufflink has no pride to protect. Neither does a corpse, I said, and handed him a fresh sheet of my notes. Wolfe skimmed, then pointed to a detail I hadn't emphasized. The phrase from the note Veronica delivered. The Penthouse betrayal is no longer a rumor. Rumor, Wolfe muttered. That implies a pre-existing suspicion. Someone in their circle already believed this death was not self-inflicted, and more, someone feared it was orchestrated. I sat down and wanted us to sniff around quietly before it got buried by a press cycle or a boardroom vote. Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment, fingers steepled, lips motionless. Have Saul checked the visitor logs at the Orion Tower, he said. I want to know if Daniel Rowan was seen entering within the past 2 weeks. Also check airport records for Connecticut to LaGuardia. I stood. And me? He opened one eye. Connect me to Mr. Rowan. I dialed. Wolfe never liked phones, but occasionally he made exceptions for surgical strikes. The voice that answered was smooth, mid-30s, and wore expensive cologne over the line. Daniel Rowan speaking? This is Nero Wolfe, came the thunder. You were acquainted with Martiness Lyle. A pause. Yes, I was. You visited him recently? Another pause. No, not in over a month. Liar, Wolfe said mildly. Your cufflink was found beneath the chair where he died. Rowan didn't reply, not for a full 10 seconds. Then, that's impossible. No, Wolfe said. It's inevitable. You are invited to my home tomorrow at 11. Declining would be ill-advised. Click. I whistled low. You don't usually lead with blackmail. That wasn't blackmail, Wolfe said. That was gravity. He stood. Yes, stood, and crossed to the bookshelves behind his desk. That meant something had disturbed him enough to justify motion. He pulled down a slim blue volume titled Behavioral, Manifestations of Strategic Guilt, and opened to a bookmarked page. Archie, he said, we are now investigating a murder disguised as a performance. The scene was arranged for an audience, us, perhaps, or Veronica, or someone yet unknown. But the killer made one mistake. The chair, he nodded. A suicidal man would not position a chair with theatrical flair. He would simply sit. The staging was meant to deceive. That requires ego. And Rowan has ego to spare. Wolfe closed the book and returned to his chair with the satisfaction of a general returning from reconnaissance. We will proceed, Mr. Goodwin, he said, with great caution and no sympathy. There is a murderer in a tailored suit, and he has not yet finished his performance. That's when the doorbell rang. Again. Fritz appeared seconds later with a look that said, Brace yourself. A Mr. Gideon Park is here. He says he is Martin Lyle's personal accountant. I turned to Wolfe. Another visitor? Wolfe didn't blink. Show him in. As the footsteps approached, I caught Wolfe adjusting the photo of Lyle ever so slightly on the desk, rotating it by 2 degrees, facing outward. Gideon Park walked into the brownstone like a man who'd just found a typo in a will and wasn't sure whether to report it or rewrite the whole thing. He was lean, mid-50s, and wore a charcoal gray suit that hadn't seen a wrinkle since 2003. His eyeglasses were thick-rimmed and precise, and the briefcase in his left hand looked as though it had been polished on the ride over. Mr. Wolfe, he said, giving me a nod that barely acknowledged my species. I appreciate the prompt reception. Wolfe, seated and swollen with intellectual superiority, did not move. You are Martin Lyle's financial custodian. I was, Park said. Technically still am, until probate clears. I've been managing the Lyle estate since before his father passed. He spoke with the efficiency of a spreadsheet, but there was something twitchy in his fingers as he sat down across from Wolfe. Not nerves. Not exactly. More like urgency fighting etiquette. He hadn't come to mourn or reminisce. He'd come to unload. I received a copy of the police report this morning, he said. Suicide, slashed wrists, no struggle, no forced entry. You're investigating otherwise. Wolfe rested his fingertips together. That remains to be determined. Park didn't look satisfied. Then let me add a financial anomaly to your column. I looked up from my notebook. Now we're talking. He reached into his briefcase, removed a folder clipped with military precision, and slid it onto Wolfe's desk. 3 days before his death, Martin transferred $600,000 from a personal account into a newly opened trust. The name on the trust, Avril 3. No beneficiary listed. No withdrawal clauses. Just a shell. Anonymized? Wolfe asked. Park nodded. Through a third-party trustee service in Nassau. Not uncommon for offshore activity, but Martin didn't dabble in secrecy. His fortune was American, his taxes pristine. This was out of character. Could he have been coerced? I can't say. But the timing is troubling, and the amount was just enough to raise no alarms, but high enough to matter. I flipped the folder open and skimmed the wire logs. Where's the trust located? Grand Bahama. I whistled. That's some expensive sand. Wolfe was watching Park closely now, reading him the way he might study a diseased orchid, looking for signs of blight, rot, or hidden root damage. "You are not here solely because of the trust," Wolfe said. Park hesitated. "No." Wolfe didn't prompt him. He waited, as only he can, with stillness so weighty it might compress coal into diamonds. Park finally leaned forward. "The sister, Veronica. She's not as innocent as she looks. 2 weeks ago, Martin removed her from the board of the Lyle Family Foundation, said she was interfering in acquisition talks. I begged him not to make it formal until after the holidays, but he was angry, determined. He said she'd been trying to broker a private deal behind his back, something that would make her majority controller of Lyle Holdings." "And what did she say?" "She denied it, naturally. But she didn't deny meeting with Daniel Rowan." Wolfe's mouth tightened, just slightly. "Interesting." Park's fingers danced on the briefcase lock. "I'm telling you this now because I believe Martin was murdered, and Veronica's been far too eager to direct suspicion outward." I took down every word, then asked, "Did Martin keep hard copies of his financials?" "Yes, in a personal safe in the Penthouse study. Only he and I had the code. The police removed nothing, and the coroner's report listed no disturbance." "And when's the last time you saw that safe?" 2 weeks ago. He showed me a signed letter, one I haven't been able to locate since his death." "Do you remember what it said?" Park nodded grimly. "It revoked power of attorney from Veronica." Wolfe made a sound in his throat like someone had just lit a match inside a library. "Mr. Park," he said, "have you shared this information with the police?" "No. I don't trust their interest in Lyle's affairs. Suicide wraps everything neatly." "Then you will keep it to yourself until I request otherwise." Park gave a curt nod, and Wolfe motioned for him to go. I walked him to the door, and when I returned, Wolfe was already mid-mutter, pacing with all the grace of a glacier that had momentarily remembered how to walk. "Daniel Rowan is a pawn," he said, "or possibly a sacrificial knight. Veronica Lyle is too composed. She appears wounded, but her eyes are always measuring." I perched on the arm of my chair. "You think she's behind the trust?" "Not alone, but she's positioned to benefit." I tapped my pen on my notepad. "So what's the play? Forge a suicide note, hide the revocation letter, ship 600 grand offshore, and wait for the estate to settle." Wolfe lifted a finger. "Too imprecise. Veronica is calculated. If she planned this, there is another layer, a fail-safe." I stood. "Want me to shake the family tree again?" "No," Wolfe said. "I want to see the Penthouse safe." "Didn't the police already?" "They didn't know what to look for. You do." "Fritz won't like me skipping dinner." "Then you'll take 2 sandwiches." I did better. I took 3. At 7:30, I was back in the Orion Tower. The concierge remembered me and didn't blink when I signed the log. The penthouse was as cold as I'd left it, and the city beyond the windows glittered with indifference. The study was smaller than expected. Leather chairs, walnut shelves, framed real estate awards. The safe was tucked behind a hinged painting, just like in the movies. I punched in Park's code and listened to the tumblers spin. Inside, paperwork. Neat rows, a blue folder stamped with private, a sealed envelope addressed to the Lyle Board of Directors, and beneath it, a flash drive. I took the envelope and the drive, resealed the safe, and made sure nothing looked touched. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was already seated, wearing a robe the color of mustard and a look that said he'd been waiting for dessert. And I'd brought the pie. I handed him the envelope first. He slit it open with his penknife and read silently. Then he opened the blue folder, which contained a ledger, payments, dates, signatures, all tied to the Averill 3 Trust. The handwriting matched Martin's. Finally, I plugged in the flash drive and projected its contents onto the office wall. There, in cold black and white, were surveillance clips, one dated 2 nights before the death. It showed Veronica entering the Penthouse at 11:47 p.m. and Daniel Rowan 15 minutes later, together. Neither one of them left before 3 a.m. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "Murder," he said, "conspired in silk gloves." And that's when the phone rang. "Mr. Wolfe," said Fritz, voice low, "Veronica Lyle is here. She says she's ready to confess." She came in wearing gilt like a tailored coat, flawless, expensive, and completely inappropriate for the weather. Veronica Lyle's heels clicked across the office rug like a metronome, keeping time for a requiem, and for once, even her poise seemed rehearsed. She didn't wait to be offered a seat. She sat. Wolfe, on the other side of the desk, didn't rise. Naturally. "I said I'm ready to confess," she announced. Her voice was low, level, and intended to carry the weight of a dagger laid on a table. Wolfe didn't blink. "Indeed. To what, precisely?" She opened her purse and placed a single object on the desk. A key, old brass, with a frayed blue tag. "That opens the safe in Martin's penthouse. I should have told you before." "I've already seen the safe," I said, "and the envelope inside." Her lips twitched. "Then you know. About the trust, the flash drive, the board letter, all of it." "I know what was in the safe," Wolfe said. "Not necessarily what it means. Begin, Miss Lyle." She took a breath, the kind meant to steel the ribcage before impact. "Martin and I were in the middle of a fight over the company. Not just the foundation, not just the shares, everything. I wanted to pivot into international holdings. He said it would dilute the brand. He called me reckless." "Were you?" Wolfe asked. She smiled faintly. "I was ambitious. I still am." "Not a crime," I said. "No," she replied. "But what I did to prove my point might be." Wolfe shifted slightly, his version of a gasp. Veronica didn't flinch. "I hired Daniel Rowan, not as a legal advisor, as a plant. He was meant to charm Martin, gain trust, and feed me insights, numbers, strategy, vulnerabilities." "That explains the cufflink," I muttered. "Not quite." She looked at me, eyes sharp. "Daniel was supposed to back out after 2 months. But he didn't. He got close. Too close. He started making promises he had no business making, about merger votes, about shifting Martin's stance, about his place at the table. I told him to stop. He said I owed him." "Did Martin find out?" Wolfe asked. "I think so. A week before his death, he told me he'd been reviewing security footage. He wouldn't say what he saw, just that he'd been betrayed in plain sight." "His words?" Wolfe asked. She nodded. "Yes." "And you believed he was referring to Daniel?" "Who else?" she said. Martin didn't trust easily. If he felt Daniel had crossed a line, he might have reacted impulsively. Wolfe made a soft sound in the back of his throat, somewhere between agreement and derision. "So you assumed Martin had discovered your espionage. And rather than risk exposure, you, what, confronted him?" "I went to the Penthouse," she said. "Yes, the night before he died. I wanted to explain." "Explain corporate betrayal?" I asked. Her voice dropped. "I wasn't there long. We argued. He was angry, but not violent. He told me to leave. That was all. And yet hours later he was dead," Wolfe said flatly. She met his gaze. "I didn't kill him." "No," Wolfe said, voice even. "I suspect you didn't. But you believe you caused it." Her silence was all the confirmation needed. She folded her hands in her lap, eyes down. "I watched the news like everyone else. Suicide. But I knew better. I knew it had roots in what I'd done." "And Rowan?" Wolfe asked. "Did you confront him after?" "I tried. He's been dodging my calls. Last I heard, he was preparing to leave the country." Wolfe leaned back, gaze narrowing to a knife's edge. That would be inconvenient timing. I crossed to my desk and pulled out the flash drive again. "We already have Rowan on camera, entering the penthouse after you left." Her head snapped up. "What?" 15 minutes later. He stayed until 3. That's impossible, she whispered. He told me he hadn't seen Martin in weeks. Wolfe raised a hand. Miss Lyle, the truth has already outpaced your narrative. Now I require specifics. She blinked, thrown off course. What specifics? You believe you pushed your brother toward despair, that your deception, using Rowan, was the catalyst for his suicide. But Martin Lyle did not die by his own hand. He died by someone else's. She didn't speak. Wolfe continued, voice dropping like thunder filtered through velvet. And the flash drive he left behind, the footage, the records. It wasn't despair. It was a breadcrumb trail, a last maneuver. Martin knew someone would come for him. But, she began. Miss Lyle, Wolfe said, you have confused guilt with complicity. Not the same, but both are excellent motivators for bad decisions. I added, and if Rowan's trying to fly out of the country, we don't have a lot of time to pin him down. Veronica turned slowly toward me, a new awareness creeping into her posture. He said he had friends in the Caribbean, she said. Some trust firm. They were going to make it all vanish. That was the phrase. That's where the Averill 3 Trust is, I said. That money was never meant for estate smoothing. It was hush cash. For silence or escape, Wolfe said. She nodded slowly. Then I've been chasing the wrong ghost? No, Wolfe replied. You've been mourning the wrong crime. I stood, grabbed my notebook and headed for the phone. If Rowan's still in the state, we've got a shot. Begin with Saul, Wolfe said. Then call Inspector Kramer. Veronica was quiet, her hands now gripping the sides of the chair. I want to help, she said. Whatever I can do. Wolfe gave a solemn nod. Then wait. Here, until we know if the noose tightens or snaps. She didn't argue. I dialed Saul Panzer first. He picked up on the second ring, sounding like he was already in motion. Yeah? Rowan's on the move. Wolfe wants eyes on every airport and rail station. Already ahead of you, Saul said. LaGuardia flagged a Daniel Rowan for a 10:50 a.m. flight to Freeport. One-way ticket. He's checked in. When? 30 minutes ago. Flight boards in 40. I snapped my fingers at Wolfe, who was already reaching for his Rolodex. Stall him, I told Saul. Any way you can. Legally. Saul snorted. Don't insult me. I hung up and turned back to the office. Kramer, I asked. Wolfe had already lifted the receiver. Archie, prepare a complete summary. Miss Lyle, if yous would kindly remain, this affair may yet require a witness with both memory and courage. Veronica sat straighter, as if that simple phrase restored some vertebrae she'd been missing all week. And outside, somewhere in a terminal filled with humming voices and rolling luggage, Daniel Rowan was about to find out that an escape plan built on betrayal and silk suits only got you as far as the boarding gate. LaGuardia at 10:15 in the morning is about as peaceful as a cage full of caffeinated parrots. Saul Panzer knew that, of course, and he wasn't the type to let a little chaos get in the way of a clean intercept. He moved through the terminal with the practiced fluidity of a man who'd tailed more suspects than most cops had written tickets, his eyes scanning departure monitors and gate clusters, until he spotted his mark near gate 24B. Daniel Rowan was hard to miss, tall, tan, and dressed like a magazine ad for offshore banking. He stood at the boarding queue, casually checking his phone with the relaxed air of a man convinced the worst was behind him. The boarding pass was already in hand, his carry-on a sleek charcoal roller that probably held more secrets than socks. Saul didn't walk straight up. He circled once, noted the gate agents, 2 TSA officers by a vending machine, and a man with an infant carrier who looked more volatile than Rowan. Then he approached. Mr. Rowan, Saul said evenly, just loud enough to carry over the boarding call. Rowan turned with a flicker of irritation, probably expecting an autograph request. What he got was Saul flashing a laminated badge that wasn't quite NYPD but looked official enough to pause a heartbeat. You'll need to come with me, sir, We've had a report. Rowan's brows furrowed. A report? Of what? Financial irregularities tied to your trust account, Saul said. Preliminary flags through TSA security. You'll be cleared soon, but we can't let you board just yet. That's when Rowan's smile cracked. Look, I'm late for a meeting in Freeport, he said. Whatever this is, my attorney. Your attorney's not on this flight, Saul said, unless he's in the overhead compartment. Rowan shifted his weight. I've done nothing illegal. Then you've got nothing to worry about, Saul replied. Rowan glanced at the boarding group. Group A had started trickling forward. I'm not going anywhere until... That's when Saul stepped slightly closer and dropped his voice an octave. You're already not going anywhere. You can talk to me in private or wait for Port Authority to escort you. Your choice. Rowan looked like he was doing the mental math on whether to bolt, bluff, or comply. In the end, something in Saul's eyes made the decision for him. Fine, he muttered. They stepped aside, Saul steering him gently toward a bench beside a magazine kiosk. From there, he called me on the dot, and I relayed the good news to Wolfe, who was in the middle of briefing Inspector Kramer. You've got him, Kramer barked over the line, already grumbling like he had onions in his socks. Where? Gate 24B at LaGuardia, I said. Saul's holding him with some creative license. I'm 20 minutes out, Kramer growled. Tell your guy to sit tight and not do anything fancy. Wolfe, I added, has the surveillance video, the flash drive, and the board revocation letter, plus a verbal confession from Veronica about the corporate sabotage angle. Kramer let out a noise that sounded like a grudging sigh. All right, but if this turns into a media circus, I'm coming straight to that orchid-lined fortress of yours and tearing it down, petal by petal. I'll bring lemonade, I said, and hung up. Wolfe, naturally, was still seated, his bulk settled like a Roman senator awaiting tributes. Veronica sat across from him, her earlier composure now replaced with quiet alertness. She hadn't spoken in the last 15 minutes, and I suspected she was thinking through every mistake she'd ever made involving Daniel Rowan. Archie, Wolfe said without looking up. Once Kramer has Rowan in custody, he'll attempt to paint this as a simple betrayal followed by opportunistic murder. Sounds simple enough to me, I replied. But it's insufficient, Wolfe said. Rowan did not merely see an opportunity. He created it. You're saying he didn't just cover up a suicide, he orchestrated the whole show? Wolfe nodded. The chair, the note, the missing revocation letter, and the timing of the trust transfer, all planned, all executed in sequence. Then what's the complication? He tapped his index finger against the armrest. Rowan's not a fool. If he's caught, I suspect he'll offer a version of events that places the fatal action in Martin's own hands. Perhaps during a heated confrontation, something accidental, something emotional. Something soft enough to buy him a reduced sentence, I muttered. Precisely. It was a clever tactic. Muddy the motive, introduce emotional ambiguity, and pray for jury leniency. But Wolfe wasn't having it. Therefore, he said, we must extract the intent, not just the method. And how do you do that without a witness? Wolfe turned his eyes to Veronica. You ask the one person Rowan underestimated. She blinked. Me? Indeed. He presumed you would protect him, that your guilt would silence you. She took a breath. He was right. Until now. Then we'll arrange for you to confront him, Wolfe said, with Kramer present. That's a risk, I said. It's a necessity, Wolfe replied. Saul called again as soon as Kramer arrived on site. Rowan was now in a holding room near baggage claim, agitated but composed. I passed the update to Wolfe, who instructed Veronica to prepare herself. He'll lie, Wolfe said, possibly convincingly. Not to me, she said, her voice flat and steady. Not anymore. Wolfe nodded. Good. Then we'll begin. 30 minutes later, we were in a quiet interrogation room at LaGuardia, if there's such a thing. Kramer stood with his arms folded, flanked by a detective I didn't recognize and a stenographer clicking away at her keys. Saul leaned against the back wall like an unpaid bouncer. Rowan sat in the center, wrists unshackled for now, and posture confident enough to be irritating. Then Veronica entered. Their eyes met, and something subtle shifted in the room. "Daniel," she said, voice cool as a dry martini, "you lied to me." Rowan blinked. Veronica, you don't have to—" She cut him off. "You told me you left the Penthouse weeks ago, that you hadn't seen Martin, but the camera caught you there, the night he died." Rowan looked toward Kramer, then back at her. "It wasn't like that. You took 600,000 from him, you hid the letter that would have exposed me, and you forged a scene that made his death look like despair." "No," he snapped. "I didn't. He was already—" She stepped closer. "You killed him, because you knew if he exposed me, you'd lose your leverage." Rowan paled. "I didn't lay a finger on him." "But you moved the chair," she said softly. He froze. It was only a beat, a hesitation no longer than a skipped breath, but Wolfe, watching through the observation glass, closed his eyes in satisfaction. "You moved the chair," Veronica repeated. "You staged the body. You thought no one would notice." Rowan opened his mouth, but Kramer raised a hand. "That's enough," the inspector growled. "Mr. Rowan, you're under arrest. Fraud, obstruction, conspiracy to commit murder, and whatever else I find in the next 5 minutes." Rowan's mouth worked, but no words came out. Saul stepped forward and read him his rights with the same calm he might have used to recite a grocery list. Back in the car, Wolfe didn't say a word until we were halfway back to the brownstone. Then, finally, "Emotion is a marvelous smokescreen, but chairs, Mr. Goodwin, chairs tell the truth. Inspector Kramer doesn't believe in saying thank you unless someone's just saved him from a piano falling out of a 5th-story window. But when he showed up at the brownstone the next morning with his hat off and his cigar unlit, I figured we'd come about as close as anyone could get. He didn't sit. He paced. 3 steps across Wolfe's rug. Turn. 3 steps back. Turn. Wolfe watched him with all the patience of a man supervising a slowly burning soufflé. "You jammed that guy up clean," Kramer finally said. Rowan cracked like a candy shell. The chair detail, the camera footage, the letter from the safe. It stacked up tight. He's got a lawyer already barking about accidental provocation, but the DA's not biting. "Nor should he," Wolfe said. "Rowan's arrangement of the scene was premeditated. That alone precludes a spontaneous act." "Yeah, well, the press is eating it up," Kramer said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Lyle's suicide-turned-murder mystery, trust fund betrayal, boardroom chess match, it's got all the trimmings." "Have they reached you yet?" I asked. "Wanting quotes?" Kramer said. "No one wants to quote the cop. They want the genius in the chair." Wolfe made a noise, half grunt, half resignation. "I abhor reporters." "They love you," I said helpfully. "You're mysterious and photogenic." Kramer snorted. "Anyway, there's just one loose end that's poking at me." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Kramer reached into his coat and pulled out a single folded sheet of cream paper. "The housekeeper." I straightened slightly. "Esther?" "Yeah, Esther Harper. 58, been with the Lyles for over 20 years, the one who found the body. NYPD ran a clean interview, no contradictions, but—" Wolfe's tone sharpened. "But?" "She said Martin had a habit," Kramer said, "before he sat down in that chair, always took off his shoes. Slippers only in the penthouse. House rule, no exception. But when he was found, one shoe was on, the other was off." Wolfe sat very still. "Now," Kramer continued, "Rowan could have planted him in the chair but forgot the slippers. We know he staged the scene, but the timing doesn't make sense. Meaning? I asked. Harper heard the chair scrape at 2:10 a.m. She thought nothing of it, figured Martin was still working. But the footage we recovered from the building's hallway shows Rowan leaving at 2:26, which means the chair was moved before Rowan left. That's consistent with the timeline, Wolfe said. Kramer shook his head. But the autopsy places time of death closer to 2:30. That chilled the room a few degrees. So if the chair scraped at 2:10, I said slowly, and Rowan didn't kill Martin until 2:30, then someone else was there earlier, Kramer said. Wolfe's gaze darkened like a thundercloud rolling over a chessboard. Another player, unaccounted for. Kramer nodded. We've reviewed all elevator logs and keycard swipes. No anomalies, except one. He pulled another sheet from his coat pocket and handed it to me. Maintenance access used at 1:47 a.m. to override Penthouse elevator lock. Card registered to a cleaning contractor, no name, just the company tag. Routine inspections usually happen during the day, but this one logged in for night sanitation. No scheduled work order. I read it. Hydrolux Cleaning, third-party contractor for the Orion Tower. Wolfe had closed his eyes now, fingers steepled. Archie, the flash drive. I retrieved it from the cabinet and slid it into the laptop, scrolling to the hallway. Footage. There, Wolfe said. Advance to 1:46 a.m. The screen showed the elevator bay. Empty. Then a man in a dark utility jumpsuit stepped out, face obscured by a surgical mask and cap. He carried no tools, no equipment. No cart, I said. No mop. Just the uniform. Kramer cursed under his breath. You think it's a fake? I think, Wolfe said, that Rowan did not act alone, and that whoever preceded him into the penthouse had two jobs: retrieve a document and prepare the scene. Meaning Rowan wasn't just a killer, I said. He was a closer. Wolfe opened his eyes. Kramer, you must contact Hydrolux immediately, verify all issued ID cards, determine who had access on that night. I'm on it, Kramer said. I'll get them on the phone now. He stormed out with the force of a hurricane stuffed into a trench coat. I turned to Wolfe. So the mystery just got a second act? No, Wolfe said. It got a prelude. Martin Lyle's death was a crescendo, but someone wrote the opening notes. Veronica arrived that afternoon with a copy of the Financial Times under one arm and an expression equal parts gratitude and guilt. Wolfe received her with the gravity of a bishop holding court. I showed her the footage of the masked man and the Hydrolux tag. This isn't Daniel, she said softly. He wouldn't wear a janitor's badge. True, Wolfe said. But perhaps someone he trusted would. She frowned. What are you suggesting? Mr. Rowan's connection to the Caribbean Trust was recent, but the trust itself, Avril III, was established 5 months ago, before he was formally attached to your brother's firm. The name is not without significance. She blinked. What significance? Avril, Wolfe said, is not just an exotic-sounding placeholder. It's a surname. Veronica's face drained of color. My first husband's name was John Avril, she whispered. And his brother's name? Wolfe asked. Cyrus, she said. He's a consultant. We don't speak. Was he ever connected to Hydrolux? I asked. Her voice was a whisper. He owned a portion of it, before he sold his stake 2 years ago. But I think he still uses their access. For side projects. Wolfe's voice was leaden now. He was brought in for access and misdirection. He entered first, retrieved the letter revoking your board power, and staged the setting. Rowan arrived after, committed the act, and completed the arrangement. They thought their partnership made them invincible. She stood, eyes glassy. Then I wasn't just a pawn, I was the bait. Yes, Wolfe said. And you survived. Outside, rain had started falling, quiet and cold, tapping against the windows like fingers drumming through the final pages of a confession. Inside, Wolfe reached for the phone. "Archie, find Kramer. Tell him the second man has a name." Veronica sat motionless in the red armchair like someone realizing, all at once, that the floor plan of her life had been drawn in vanishing ink. Wolfe had already given me the nod, his way of saying, "Go fetch the storm," and I was halfway through dialing Kramer when her voice cut through the quiet. "I brought Cyrus into the family," she said. "I made him presentable." I paused. "You married the older brother and mentored the younger." "He was always around," she said, not looking at me. "Quick, eager, too clever for his own good, but he had debts, obscure ventures, whispered schemes. Martin hated him. And now he's moved from schemes to corpses," I said. Wolfe didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence had become punctuation, periods where truth settled and exclamation points, where the foolish stopped breathing. I turned back to the phone. Kramer picked up, sounding like someone had just interrupted his lunch. "You've got a name?" he grunted. "Cyrus Avril," I said. "Connected to Hydrolux, indirectly. Brother of Veronica's late husband. Slipped into the penthouse under a sanitation override at 1:47 a.m. Rowan followed. A pause. "Got an address?" "We're working on it," I said. "But he's likely squirreling away funds from the Avril 3 Trust. If he hasn't skipped already, he's planning to. You think he's in the city?" "I think he's too arrogant to leave yet." Kramer sighed. "Fine, I'll run the warrants. But you better be sure, Goodwin. This second guy, we don't have him on camera touching anything." "He touched everything," I said. "He just wore gloves." Wolfe was already reaching for his address book when I hung up. "Archie, contact Saul." "On it," Wolfe dictated, slowly, precisely. "Have him check offshore transactions flagged under Avril 3. Focus on travel purchases, luxury lodgings, or encrypted communication services. Anything recent." "Got it. And tell him," Wolfe added, "we need eyes on both ports and private airstrips." While I relayed the message, Wolfe closed his eyes. When I finished, he spoke without opening them. "There's a reason the letter was taken, Archie. To stop Veronica from assuming board control. Yes, but that alone was insufficient motive. Cyrus needed more, and he found it." I waited. He knew about Veronica's role in the espionage, her use of Rowan to access company details. He held it as leverage. With the revocation letter gone, she was vulnerable. He could name her as complicit, discredit her, and sweep in as a savior. I sat forward. "And then? What, step into the board himself?" Wolfe nodded. With Rowan removed, the trust funds absorbed, and Veronica disgraced, he could claim the moral high ground. Position himself as steward of the legacy, through her, if not officially. I glanced over at her. She hadn't flinched. "You think he wanted me, back under his influence?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "but not for love. For optics." Veronica whispered, "He called me the week before Martin died. Said we were all going to come out ahead." I didn't understand what he meant. "Now you do," Wolfe said gently. "You were not his partner. You were his alibi." Before she could answer, the phone rang again. I picked up. "Saul," came the voice. "Got a hit." "Let's have it." 2 hours ago, a first-class suite at the Hudson Meridian was reserved under a private Cayman holding tide to Avril 3. Alias used T. Caldecott. I had the hotel's concierge send me a scan of the guest's ID, blurry, but enough. "And?" "It's him," Saul said. "Cyrus Avril, hiding behind a fake passport and a spa robe." I turned to Wolfe. "We've got him." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Call Kramer?" "Now." 10 minutes later, Kramer's bulldogs were en route to the Hudson Meridian with enough backup to surround the minibar. Wolfe stood only after the call ended, pacing to the bookshelves. where he slid a small black binder free from a locked cabinet. He handed it to Veronica. She opened it slowly. Inside were annotated copies of the Averill III Trust, the flight manifests, security logs, and financial withdrawal patterns. Every thread neatly tied with Wolfe's ink. "You'll want this," he said, "for your meeting with the board and the press." "I'm not sure I'll want to speak to either," she said, voice thin. "You must," Wolfe replied. "You are a fool, but you are not a villain. The distinction matters, and it may be all that separates you from ruin." Her hands trembled, but only slightly. "I never meant for Martin to die." "Then ensure his name is remembered for his resistance, not your silence." She nodded and stood, clutching the binder like a rescue line. She paused at the door. "You saved me," she said. "No," Wolfe said. "You saved yourself, by choosing to speak." And with that, she was gone. We didn't hear from Kramer until close to 8 that evening. He arrived in person, this time with his cigar lit and his coat soaked with drizzle. He entered the office without waiting for Fritz to announce him and dropped a folded document on Wolfe's desk. "Got him at the hotel bar," he said. Had a burner phone in one hand and a copy of Forbes in the other. He was ordering lobster rolls and talking about crypto. "You'd have hated him." "Undoubtedly," Wolfe said. "We've got prints. We've got the ID trail. The judge approved a second warrant, and we found the revocation letter, burned but not completely. It had been crumpled and stuffed behind a wall panel in the Penthouse guest bathroom. Cleaning crew found it during repairs. Apparently, Cyrus wasn't as clever with drywall as he was with murder." He turned to me. "I owe you a drink?" I grinned. "I'll take a sandwich." "You'll get a subpoena," he muttered, and left. When the door shut, Wolfe exhaled, just once. Then he reached for the bell. Fritz arrived moments later with 2 trays. "Dinner." Wolfe leaned back and began unfolding his napkin like a man restoring balance to the world. "Archie," he said, "do you recall what I said at the start of this? Something about sauce and barbarism." "Indeed." He lifted a bite of trout amandine and paused. "Let it be noted. Emotional chaos often masks intellectual cowardice. But justice is methodical." I raised my glass. "To justice and chairs that never lie." The meeting took place in a steel and glass boardroom 15 floors above Lexington Avenue. Veronica arrived 5 minutes early, in a black suit with no jewelry and a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. It was raining again. Steady, unremarkable rain that blurred the skyline into long streaks of gray and gold. From the cab across the street, I watched the building swallow her. My job wasn't to go in. Wolfe had made that clear. I was only there to observe and report. What happened in that room would either realign the trajectory of a family empire or confirm its disintegration. Veronica had chosen to step back into the fire. Wolfe wanted to know how she held the torch. The board members had gathered in defensive formations. Most were men in tailored suits who'd once shaken Martin's hand and smiled at him while privately praying for his early retirement. A few were women, smarter than the rest, watching everything twice before reacting once. No one smiled when Veronica walked in. What followed was not dramatic, not in the Broadway sense. There were no shouts or slaps or weeping confessions, but there were gasps, audible pauses, and then silence as she laid out the facts Wolfe had assembled. Financial trails, time-stamped security footage, even the burned letter now restored and authenticated through forensic light scans. She didn't hide her own role. She confessed to using Rowan, to her failed maneuvering. She told them how guilt had blinded her to the larger betrayal. She admitted to weakness, but then she did something none of them expected. She handed in her resignation. The room froze. She offered no deals, no fallback position. She simply declared that the name Lyle had to mean something again, and she could no longer be the one to decide what. That alone changed the temperature of the room. The wolves, sensing blood, now hesitated. One of the older directors leaned back, crossed his arms, and muttered something about courage. Another whispered that this was the first honest thing they'd heard since the funeral. A third said it would restore public confidence. By the time she left the boardroom, she hadn't been re-elected or exiled. She'd been noted. That rare, weightless shift when power doesn't change hands but changes tone. I watched her come out, slow and straight, the folder still under her arm, her mouth set like stone. We didn't speak until we were back in the cab. She was staring out the window, eyes reflecting traffic lights. "You think I salvaged anything?" she asked. I nodded. "Your name? That's a start. And Martin? You gave him back the dignity Cyrus tried to burn." She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped half an inch. For her, that was practically a hug. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was mid-prandial, veal blanquette with lemon butter, Fritz's specialty when morale needed shoring up. I gave him the play-by-play, sparing no detail. When I finished, he pushed his plate away and closed his eyes. "She yielded position," he said, "but kept her narrative. She called herself complicit." "She was," he said. "But she wasn't criminal. The distinction matters." I settled into the red chair. "And Rowan?" "Has confessed to conspiracy and falsification," Wolfe said. "His attorney now claims Cyrus coerced him, threatened to expose old financial sins. It's unconvincing, but not implausible. That, too, will be decided in court." "And Cyrus?" "Attempted to wire funds from a VPN server in Grenada while in custody. Not wise. Kramer added 2 more charges before he'd even had breakfast." I exhaled. "So it's over?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He was staring into the office space, not unfocused, but thoughtful in that way that meant he wasn't quite ready to file it all away. "What?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "The peculiar thing, Archie, is how much of this was emotional." "You mean Veronica's guilt?" "No," he said. "Cyrus's envy, Rowan's desperation, Veronica's hunger for control. Even Martin, the most rational of them all, left a digital breadcrumb trail instead of calling the police. Every player acted from emotional pressure." "That's normal," I said. "We're human." "No," Wolfe said. "We're pattern-seeking animals pretending at logic. But occasionally, one man, the murdered in this case, fights through that fog long enough to make order from chaos." "He didn't live to see it," I said. "No," Wolfe admitted. "But he saw far enough to leave us the thread." He turned to me. "That photograph, the body in the chair, the single shoe, the back-turned position, it wasn't just a clue, it was a message. Martin staged part of it himself before Rowan arrived." I blinked. "You think he knew?" "I think he suspected someone was coming for him. That's why he left the flash drive. Why he placed the chair facing away, but didn't fully settle. Why he made sure one shoe stayed on, something Rowan would overlook." I whistled. "A man about to be murdered leaves a trail, not for justice, for clarity." "Yes," Wolfe said. "So we could know he didn't choose death. He chose defiance." It was the kind of thing Wolfe rarely said, something close to admiration. That night after dinner, I typed up the case file. 3 copies, one for the city, one for Wolfe's archive, and one sealed envelope with Veronica's name on it. Wolfe insisted it be delivered by hand. I asked if we were billing her. He thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "Her recompense is that the truth now bears her fingerprints, not just her failures." I made the delivery the next morning. No signature required. And back at the brownstone, the orchids bloomed. The veal was replaced with trout. Wolfe refused to speak until 11. Order was restored. But I never looked at an empty chair quite the same way again. The morning after I delivered Veronica's sealed envelope, Wolfe declared a moratorium on all business until further notice. No new clients, no interviews, no orchids even, which told me the case had drained more from him than he cared to admit. He spent most of the day parked in his oversized armchair with a copy of Montaigne's essays in one hand and a glass of sherry in the other. The only sounds in the office were the faint rustle of paper and the soft chime of Fritz in the kitchen preparing something with cream and chives. For my part, I cleaned out the correspondence tray, filed the case documents, and straightened the photo of Martin Lyle Wolfe had kept on the edge of his desk. A silent token of respect, rare as truffles in May. It wasn't until just past 4 that Wolfe finally spoke. "You find the case concluded, Archie?" I looked up from the back page of the Gazette. Cyrus Averil's arraignment was this morning. Judge denied bail. The trust has been frozen, and the DA's pushing for extradition on the offshore activity. Rowan's lawyers are already scrambling for a plea. Wolfe took a slow sip of sherry, then set the glass down. I asked if you find it concluded. I considered that. The bodies are buried, the culprits are caged, and the paper trail's been tied up neater than your tie clip collection. He exhaled softly. But the human element remains open. You mean Veronica? I mean all of them, Wolfe said. Veronica, Cyrus, Rowan, even Martin. They each navigated a world of appearances, of trust engineered and betrayed, of inheritance weaponized. Each acted from desire, some rational, others ruinous, and each, in his or her own way, tried to rewrite their ending. I leaned back in my chair. Martin tried to escape his own narrative, left us a breadcrumb trail like a final editorial note. Wolfe nodded. Yes, he understood that legacy is not a matter of wealth, but of clarity. I got to admit, I said, for a guy who got murdered, he ran a cleaner operation than most living men. Wolfe allowed himself the briefest hint of a smile. He left a final footnote of elegance in a story thick with mud. Fritz entered quietly with tea and a plate of delicate lemon pastries. Wolfe took one, bit it, and chewed with closed eyes. His highest form of approval. What about Veronica? I asked. Think she makes good on the second chance? Wolfe opened his eyes slowly. The question isn't whether she does. It's whether she understands what the second chance costs. Guilt's a pretty sharp teacher. It is, Wolfe said, but guilt without change is vanity. He didn't say anything more for a few minutes, and I let the silence hang. The rain had returned, tapping at the windows like someone testing a lock. It brought a sort of rhythm to the space, the tick of time reminding us that we'd won, but not without residue. I thought of Veronica standing in front of the board, her voice steady, her shame worn like armor. I thought of Rowan breaking under pressure, not from the law, but from a single line about a chair being turned the wrong way. And I thought of Cyrus, caught not by a gun or a witness, but by his misunderstanding of how justice actually works. Not as a hammer, but as a mirror. After tea, I put on my coat and headed out to stretch my legs. Wolfe didn't look up when I left, just waved me off with a finger and returned to Montaigne. Outside, the city had turned gold again, the rain giving way to reflections in puddles and traffic lights dancing on the pavement. I ended up walking uptown toward the Hudson Meridian. Just curious. The hotel was already moving on from the scandal. Valets smiling, doormen sweeping, and the lobby once again echoing with the kinds of conversations where everyone pretends their past is cleaner than their shoes. I didn't go in. I just stood there a moment, remembering what Wolfe had said about chairs, how they don't lie, and how the arrangement of a room can be a confession if you know how to read it. When I got back, Wolfe was already at his desk, writing by hand, his version of a postscript. I didn't interrupt. I poured myself a drink, sat down, and watched the flames in the fireplace flicker like nervous conspirators trying to stay warm. After a while, Wolfe folded the page, sealed it, and handed it to me. "For the archive," he said. I took it. "Title?" He considered. "The Penthouse Betrayal. Simple. Precise. No need to embellish what was already ornate." I nodded. "So we're done." He leaned back, fingertips pressing together. "Until the next client arrives?" "Yes." I poured another inch of bourbon and raised the glass. "To justice?" "To perseverance," Wolfe said. "Same thing some days." We sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the city kept humming, uncaring, unchanging. But inside the brownstone, something had closed. Not a door exactly, but a chapter. Wolfe leaned forward once more. "Archie?" "Yeah?" "If I ever die sitting in that chair, facing away from the door, don't say it. Make sure both my shoes are off." I grinned. "Sure thing, but I'm billing you extra for emotional trauma." He grunted. "You already overcharge." I learned from the best. And that, finally, was the end of it. The next morning, the city moved on, as it always does. News cycles churned, traders barked into phones, and Manhattan exhaled its usual smoke and steam symphony. You'd never guess a man had died in a penthouse barely a week earlier, or that Betrayal had been rolled up neatly into press releases and subpoenas. But inside the brownstone, the aftershocks still hummed like the low buzz of an unplugged wire. Wolfe hadn't left his chair since breakfast. I'd brought him the Times, the Journal, and 3 clippings Kramer had hand-delivered the night before. One from the Post, which ran with a photo of Rowan looking like someone caught shoplifting a Fabergé egg, and one from Bloomberg, which theorized about the future of Lyle Holdings like it was a public chess match. But the third article, buried in the business section, held Wolfe's full attention. It was an unsigned editorial, likely ghost-written but attributed to the Lyle Foundation. It outlined a restructuring initiative for the board, promising new voting mechanisms, transparency for its donors, and a full audit of offshore transactions dating back 10 years. It ended with a quote from Martin Lyle's last published interview. "A family legacy isn't what we inherit. It's what we leave intact." Wolfe folded the page with reverence and laid it beside his coffee cup. "She'll survive," he said. I nodded. "She's already halfway to myth status. Public penance, private resolve, probably end up on a panel for women in corporate ethics next spring." "She'll be tested again," Wolfe said, "but perhaps next time she'll remember the cost of silence." I tossed the latest envelope from the district attorney's office onto the desk. "Rowan pled guilty to conspiracy. He'll serve 10, maybe 12. No parole for the financial crime. The manslaughter charge sticks. Cyrus? Facing federal charges now, money laundering, obstruction, and attempted wire fraud. He's still trying to get his Cayman accounts unblocked. Good luck with that." Wolfe grunted, a satisfied, almost carnivorous sound, and reached for a folder on the edge of the desk. Inside were his own notes, handwritten with the same meticulousness he applied to every dish Fritz served. He flipped a few pages, then tapped his index finger once. "Archie." "Yeah? What lesson did you draw from this?" I leaned back in my chair, crossed my legs, and gave it half a second's thought. That the truth may be slow, but it's stubborn. That guilt doesn't always mean you're guilty. That chairs tell stories better than people do. Wolfe gave a slight nod. "Good. Now summarize the method. You want the official theory or the one with bite?" "Both." "All right," I said. Rowan was the executor. He arrived after Martin had already sensed something was wrong, left clues, prepped the flash drive, positioned the chair, kept one shoe on. Cyrus, the architect, entered first, used the Hydro-Lux badge to override the elevator, took the revocation letter, left the scene prepped for a murder dressed as a suicide. Rowan followed and completed the picture. Thought he was clever. Forgot Martin had beaten him to the staging. Correct. Wolfe said. And the why? I answered slower now. Power. Not just financial. Control over narrative. Veronica was a liability Cyrus wanted to leverage. Rowan was expendable. Martin was the only one playing a long game, and he lost his life trying to win it. Wolfe closed the folder. A pity. He would have been a client I admired. I still think he hired us, I said. In his own way. That envelope Veronica brought, he knew it would reach you. He left a trail, Wolfe agreed. He did not leave it blindly. Fritz entered a moment later with lunch. Broiled base with caper butter and a salad that probably had its own diplomatic passport. Wolfe didn't speak again until the first bite was down. What about the building staff? They've been cleared, I said. Hydrolux admitted to losing track of 2 ID badges. Cyrus cloned one through a dummy maintenance order and never raised a flag. The concierge never saw his face. Whole thing took under 12 minutes. Efficient. Like surgery, I said. Wolfe dabbed at his mouth. I've written to the board of Lyle Holdings. I recommended an independent chairperson be appointed. Someone not tied to the family or the scandal. That'll go over well. It will, Wolfe said, because they need stability more than pride. We finished lunch in silence. Then Wolfe stood, slowly, deliberately, and walked to the bookshelf behind his desk. From the second shelf on the right, he removed a small black leather-bound volume with no title on the spine. What's that? I asked. A personal ledger, he said. A habit I've resumed. Like a diary? Hardly. A record of cases I deem instructional. He opened to a blank page, uncapped his fountain pen, and wrote in crisp, slanted letters. Case, the Penthouse betrayal. Client, none fee, uncollected justice. Achieved cost, high. He paused before closing the book. You know, I said, you never did answer your own question. Wolfe looked at me. What you took from all this? His eyes narrowed slightly, but not with irritation. More like curiosity turned inward. He returned the book to its place and walked slowly back to his chair. I was reminded, he said, lowering himself with a faint grunt, that intellect solves problems, but conscience prevents them. That one hit like a velvet mallet. I let it sit. Just before dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier holding a parcel wrapped in grey linen. Inside, carefully packed in tissue and straw, was a ceramic teapot of deep green, hand-painted with a curling gold handle. No note, no signature. But I didn't need one. I brought it into the office. Wolfe examined it briefly. Her mother's wedding gift. Veronica mentioned it had been missing. Recovered. Restored, Wolfe said. She's making repairs. Literal and otherwise. We didn't speak of it again. The orchids that evening were pale yellow with crimson flecks. Wolfe said they were a hybrid that had taken years to coax into bloom. They reminded me of Martin's Penthouse, expensive, delicate, and finally, seen for what they really were. We turned in early. For once, there were no clients pounding at the door, no mysteries scratching beneath the wallpaper, just rain and silence and the faint hum of memory. Before heading upstairs, I glanced back at Wolfe. He sat with his eyes closed, the new teapot beside him, the fire dancing low. For a man who never left the house, he seemed to have traveled a long way. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and left him there, surrounded by stillness and by stories that for once had ended the right way. It was 2 days after the final arraignment when the brownstone returned to something like normal. I say like, because Wolfe, though never prone to bursts of sentiment, had developed the peculiar habit of placing the green teapot, the one Veronica had sent, presumably in gratitude, on the far right corner of his desk, where it sat like a punctuation mark no one wanted to remove. He didn't speak of it, and I didn't ask. It was enough to know that for Wolfe, allowing an object to remain in his visual field for more than 5 minutes without purpose, was as close to a fond memory as we were likely to get. I had just finished logging the last of the case notes into the typewritten archive, the official version, the one we keep for posterity when Wolfe deems a case noteworthy, when Fritz entered with a modest envelope. No monogram, no return address. He passed it to Wolfe without comment. Wolfe opened it with his ivory-handled blade and extracted a single square card. He scanned it once, said nothing, and then passed it to me. A note, handwritten in Veronica's script. Mr. Wolfe. Truth is often the only possession left to those who survive power. Thank you for ensuring mine still meant something. V. I looked at Wolfe. That's as close to poetry as I've seen from her. He grunted. Better than flattery. Some would say they're the same. No, Wolfe said. Poetry wears fewer masks. The phone didn't ring that day, or the next. The city had resumed its steady churn, and for once, Wolfe wasn't inclined to insert himself into its noise. We were in the quiet space that comes after a storm. The air clearer, the sounds sharper, the kind of quiet that isn't absence but recovery. I took the opportunity to deep clean my desk, sharpen pencils, and read through a couple of past files. There was something about revisiting old cases that felt appropriate now that the Penthouse betrayal was behind us. They reminded me that all good mysteries have a rhythm, tension, misdirection, confrontation, and clarity. What made this one different was how much of it was internal. The body had been real, the conspiracy layered, but the motives, envy, ambition, guilt, those had felt familiar. Wolfe was rereading a slim volume of Roman philosophy when I asked, "You think Veronica's going to be all right?" He didn't answer right away. He flipped a page slowly, carefully, like the act itself was part of his reply. Then finally, "She will, provided she understands that strength isn't in public recovery, but private correction." That sounds like something I should embroider on a pillow. "Don't," he said. "But you admit she did what most don't." He lowered the book to his lap. "She chose to tell the truth before it became a weapon in someone else's hands. That is not common, and yes, it earns my respect. Not admiration. Respect is rarer," he said, "more durable." That night, while Fritz prepared roast squab and sautéed greens, I walked down to the corner to pick up a few groceries and clear my head. It was one of those autumn evenings New York gets so right, dry, crisp, with the amber glow of storefronts bouncing off wet sidewalks. The kind of evening that feels wrapped in wool and memory. On the way back, I passed the newsstand. Rowan's plea deal had made the front page again, alongside an article about corporate fraud reform and the need for internal whistleblowers. There was no mention of Wolfe, of course. That's how he preferred it. He didn't need headlines. He had his orchids, his books, and the absolute knowledge that he'd been right. In his world, that was immortality. I brought the paper back anyway and laid it on his desk without comment. He barely looked at it. "Fame," he muttered, "is a sedative for those who lack conviction." "Is that going in your book of maxims?" "If it were," he said, "you'd already be quoting it." Later, while Wolfe debated with himself over whether to open a new tin of imported anchovies, I returned to the office and glanced once more at the green teapot. It sat there quietly, its shape elegant and still. I imagined Veronica in some quiet corner of the city, no longer playing queen on a board built by other men, but instead choosing her next move carefully. Maybe it wasn't redemption, but it was direction. At 9:30, just as I was about to close up shop for the night, the phone rang. Wolfe looked at it like it had insulted his dessert. I answered. "Nero Wolfe's residence." The voice on the other end was low, precise, male. "I understand Mr. Wolfe has an opening in his schedule." "Depends," I said. "What's the nature of the problem?" There was a pause. "A manuscript has gone missing from the rare book room of the Metropolitan Library," he said. "The only one of its kind. There was no forced entry, and only 3 people knew the access code." Wolfe perked up from his chair. "Go on," I said. "There was a note left in its place," the man continued. 4 words: "Some truths stay buried." I glanced at Wolfe, who was now arching one eyebrow and adjusting his vest, his version of a military salute. "Mr. Wolfe will see you at 10, I said. "Don't be late." I hung up and turned to him. "Another buried truth." He leaned back with satisfaction. "They do seem to keep finding us." I poured myself a nightcap and left the office with one last look at the green teapot. Wolfe returned to his chair. The fire was low, the storm had passed, and the game, as always, was beginning again.